Central African Time. As mining exploration expands across the African continent, questions are intensifying over who truly benefits from these projects. Delegates at the Southern Africa Oil and Gas Conference in Cape Town, South Africa, say meaningful community involvement, and particularly the inclusion of women and young people, is essential to ensuring sustainable development as well as minimizing conflict in mining regions. They warn that excluding local voices can lead to resistance, delays and long-term instability. Channel Africa's economics reporter Innocent Samosa has more.
Chief Executive Officer of Consulment SA, Professor Thami Ngubeni, has urged mining companies to put communities first as exploration activities increase across the continent.
You know, the issue of community engagement, I think, can never be understated. And engagement needs to be, I would say, honest, upfront, long before these projects are even, put on paper and financial decisions are made on them. I think we absolutely have to engage communities. We need to engage landowners. We need to engage traditional leaders and make sure that we bring communities on board quite early. When we don't do that, this is where we find ourselves in a situation where you've got organizations that are not part of the community claiming to speak on behalf of the community.
Associate at CLG Lawyers and Business Advisors, Miracle Okoro, says behind every mining project are communities whose lives are directly affected.
First of all, if we talk about numbers, the population, women make up 51% of the population. So it's a no-brainer that they should be incorporated and they should be carried along in economic activities. And if you think about what women contribute to the table, their excellent skills and intuitive abilities and how that can play a role in businesses and in economic transformation, then it also makes sense. There's a business case for women to be significant contributors in the economy. It just makes business sense.
She adds that there is a renewed focus on ensuring women and young people are not excluded from decisions that shape their land, livelihoods, and future.
There's never been a right or wrong time for women to enter, because this should not even be a conversation that we should be having about women entering. Women should have been part of the economy from the beginning. And pre-colonial times, women were part of the economy in Africa. But a lot has happened between colonialism and even neocolonialism that has created barriers and more challenges that make it difficult for women to get into sectors, especially niche industries like oil and gas and the energy sector in general.
In South Africa's Eastern Cape province, one of the most notable projects is the proposed Kolobeni mine, which holds significant titanium deposits used in aerospace and manufacturing. However, it has become a flashpoint, with local communities opposing it over land rights, environmental concerns, and livelihoods. Mvusiwekaya Sitwesha speaks on behalf of the Eastern Cape Premier's office.
For our province, you will recall that the issue of oil and gas is a fairly new area. And the explorations that are there, the first ones where we experienced a lot of problems in the White Coast. And we are attending to those problems. Government supports exploration in the province because we strongly believe it is going to help us create employment opportunities, business contract opportunities for small businesses in the province, grow the provincial economy and change the livelihood of the people of the province. We've seen how government entities are taking charge in providing guidance.
For Channel Africa News, I'm Innocent Samosa in Cape Town, South Africa.
It is exactly 4:44 Central African Time. Now, the Southern African government is currently reviewing appeals lodged against environmental authorisations granted for several offshore oil and gas exploration projects. The country's Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, Willie Aucamp, says the move is aimed at preventing further decision paralysis in the sector. He emphasised that the department has a legal as well as constitutional responsibility to make decisions that support inclusive economic growth. For more on this, we're joined on the line by Dr Ross Compton, Senior Director of Global Policy at EnerGeo Alliance. A very good afternoon to you, Doc. Welcome to Africa in Business.
Good afternoon to you as well. Thank you very much for having me.
So, Doctor, what does the government's decision to review appeals signal about the future of offshore oil and gas exploration in the country?
Well, thank you for the question. I think the news from Minister Aucamp this week is very welcomed by industry, and that decision to end decision paralysis has certainly had the potential to be a game changer for industry. Appeals have been in limbo for some time now, and those uncertainties around timelines and those appeal processes in particular are a deterrent to an investment. And remember that capital is very mobile and can go anywhere essentially. So it's a really welcome decision to see this happen. And I think the appointment of an independent panel, as we hope to see, and as the Minister has committed to resolve these stalled authorisations, sends a really strong signal that South Africa is open for business. So that's very welcome. And I think key thing to remember here is that this isn't just about operators, but it's about the contribution to GDP. It's about the thousands of potential jobs that really have been sitting, waiting in the sidelines, and the potential to get these projects moving now brings the country one step closer to realising that potential for oil and gas within the energy mix of South Africa.
And do you think that these ongoing appeals, as well as these ongoing reviews, do affect investor confidence in the country's upstream energy sector?
I think they do, absolutely. I think, as I say, that capital is very mobile. South Africa is operating in a competitive environment in relation to the oil and gas sector. There is, as you know, a lot of excitement just across the border in Namibia, but there's many other parts of the world at the moment that are, experiencing a high degree of investment and interest in exploration in their respective jurisdictions and economic zones. And so, there is the potential to deter investment by these long-term appeals, and that not only risks the investment that's already taken place in country, but I think it's also putting off other potential players that could be bringing capital to the region that currently aren't. If you think about the South African offshore environment, there are significant discoveries already, and the Petroleum Agency has highlighted those in the excellent work that they've done. But it's also a fairly underexplored area, so there are significant regions that we don't have a great deal of information about. So there's a lot more potential if that investment wasn't to be deterred.
There have also been ongoing concerns that environmentalists have been raising regarding the offshore exploration. I mean, they're arguing that this exploration poses risks to the marine ecosystems. How does the industry then respond to these concerns?
Absolutely, and we acknowledge those concerns that people have. What I would say is industry works in a very heavily regulated environment globally and also in South Africa. South Africa has got best-in-class environmental legislation, and together in combination with the rigorous international standards that industry works to, environmental risks of all kinds throughout the value chain from exploration through to production are not only considered and assessed in a structured way through environmental assessment processes, but also mitigated for in the outcomes of those environmental assessment processes. And maybe one thing to note there is that the environmental assessment regulations and requirements in South Africa are currently under consultation by the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. So there's an opportunity for civil society to have further input into how those are structured going forward. That consultation is open until April 30th for stakeholders to have their say.
You've mentioned one area where you're trying to reach out and trying to communicate. How else could industry and communities better engage in order to reduce conflict around projects of this nature?
Sure. Well, I think a couple of things to highlight there. Certainly economic development and environmental protection aren't mutually exclusive, and I think there needs to be an honest and transparent conversation about that. I think I echo the words of Professor Ngubeni that were played just prior to this segment from the Southern Africa Oil and Gas Conference that I've been attending this week. And that's a really good example of bringing different stakeholders together. So that was a very frank exchange among different stakeholders, industry, government, communities, NGOs, all represented at that particular event. So that's just one example. But if you look at the regulatory structure for public participation as well, there are many opportunities throughout the value chain from exploration through to production for stakeholders and communities to have input to the process, to raise their concerns, to ask questions of project developers, and have feedback provided to them. So, there are lots of processes, and again, that's another feature of that environmental impact assessment consultation as well, to look at how that can be structured going forward.
You mentioned a bit earlier on how these delays in approvals can actually push exploration companies to redirect capital to other African markets. You mentioned about the fluidity of these finances, but I wonder if these delays do actually worsen South Africa's reliance on imported fuel, do they?
I think you're right. That's an unfortunate consequence of the situation. South Africa, like many parts of the world that don't have domestic production, they are obviously reliant on imports from other countries. That means there are risks associated with that. There might be risks of supply when you have some of the constraints that we see at the moment in terms of the geopolitical tensions within the Middle East and the impacts that's having on bringing those fuels out from the Arabian Gulf, for example. And I think there's a real opportunity here in terms of developing domestic oil and gas production, because it has the potential to insulate South Africa from some of those risks in the longer term. So I think that opportunity in front of South Africa for all players within the value chain really is an opportunity that's too important for South Africa to pass on.
All right, we'll have to leave it at that for this afternoon. Dr. Ross Compton, Senior Director of Global Policy at EnerGeo Alliance. Thank you so much for taking us through that this afternoon. Much appreciated, sir.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. That's the good doctor, Dr. Ross Compton. He takes us to exactly 4:52.
Je, una jambo lolote akilini mwako? Je, una shauku